had it all, 14 quid in one bag.
Well, that's not like you not to complain about the price. Wait. Are you still there, Goff?
He's gone away.
As soon as I said that's not like you to not to complain about the price, he went.
He's going to count his money.
Oh God, we were having a good old chat. Oh, flippin' heck. God, well, oh God.
Anyway, greetings.
Greetings. Well, it's okay, here we go. Anyway, we're live on YouTube now, so that's good. And I would like to start by saying that I've just been having a chat with Goff about his going to Kent's Cavern. He's kindly sent me the brochure, and also he's taken some great images. And he said, "Oh, they're not very good images." Well, they're better than some of the ones on the internet. I got to be honest with you. There's Pengelly in this one, and he just sent me these images. They're pretty good images, actually. You're wandering into Kent's Cavern, you don't find these types of images, so I might use some of these. And look at that corker there, isn't that great? So Goff was just about to say, well, he had said it, that if it wasn't for doing these classes, he'd probably not gone in there. And oddly enough, on the day he went there on a Saturday, there was one of my members from up here, and I'll give her name. She's Sue, and she went with her mother on the Saturday, and Goff was saying that the guy who he had as a guide was a bit more broad-minded, and that he understood it better because we'd done it in a class setting. But the other lady, Sue, she actually had somebody who was very opinionated, who basically said Neanderthals become extinct, they become wiped off the earth and all the other things. And she was very angry when she came to the class. She said she wanted to say he was wrong. She said she knew he was wrong. And it goes to show, doesn't it? Two separate groups and two separate guides with two separate opinions on the past. And that's a really interesting juncture that we mentioned today, that we're going to start the Mesolithic period. However, I did mention, Henry, some bad news. And Goff is not happy with this at all. He's thinking about leaving. The Pregen class will start to come online with us on a Thursday morning. And guess what, Henry? Anne's back, Bill's back, Dell's back.
And the red dress.
Okay, what's that?
The red dress.
Yep, and the other thing as well is, Henry, you can't have a refund because you've got to join these online classes until July, Henry. So it's tough.
Does that mean they got evicted from their home?
No, it's basically more subtle than that. Because Jessica's she could tell you herself, but she's got another job now, and she's still working for us, but she's got another job, and she's got to be in a meeting at 4 o'clock every single Thursday in Cardiff, and she can't teach the Pregen class in the afternoon. So it's basically meaning that it's got to go online. So it seems
to get up early and go to a morning meeting.
Yeah, they're gonna have to get up early and get to an early morning meeting, just like you, Henry, being so late today, giving a lame excuse that you had to go to an emergency appointment at the dentist, and you turn up today being perfectly fine, with no bruises on your face, with no sign that you've been hit by Johnny Depp. Oh, sorry.
I do have an interesting photograph of someone from Eastern Europe, though, but I'll show you that another time.
Well, what without any arms and legs and without a head?
No, someone resembling Ash. We thought it was you. sat in Odessa, but I don't know. Could it be?
Shut up! You didn't go to Odessa, did you?
I can't tell you.
All right.
This is online. Can't talk about it.
So you can't talk about my best mate, Vladimir Putin.
No.
You can't talk about the fact that I'm money laundering millions of pounds for him under my bed. You can't mention that.
And that's why you were in Odessa.
Yeah, that's why I'm in Odessa in a caravan, yeah. Oh, I just had a knock on the door off off Smirch because I've mentioned where Vladimir Putin's millions are. But and they you know, they're just a bit upset now. So right, okay. I want to do today exactly the way I've done it. On Wednesday morning, and I want to do today as I did it on Tuesday night. And Tuesday night I didn't record the class, and there were a few things that got me thinking on Tuesday night. And so we're not going to allude any further. So what we're going to do, we're going to get my little scribble screen on, my whiteboard. And here we go. Got it? Good. So today we're going to be looking at this period, the Mesolithic. And the reason why we've done it in two bits will come apparent now. So when I say we're going to be doing the Mesolithic period today, we're going to just do the Mesolithic period as a one-off. We'll do the Neolithic period next week. No, sorry about that. We're going to be doing the Mesolithic period for about 4, 5, 6 months, because there's so much interesting sites in the Mesolithic in Britain, like Hawick on the Northumberland coastline, which is basically one class. We're going to look at Limpet Mounds. What the hell are Limpet Mounds? Goff will know, but we'll do an update on that. We'll do places like Starcar, which is up in Yorkshire. We'll look at lithic evidence, Mesolithic evidence on Shetland, all over the place. So it's a great new period. It's really exciting. However, one of the things that was mentioned on Tuesday was, after I painted the scene, I had said it's a landscape of trees. And when I'd gone through the whole lecture after about an hour 50, 60 minutes, well, that makes it 2 hours, somebody turned around and said, oh, how do you know people didn't live in trees? And my response was actually quite patronizing, deliberately. I said, that's the most stupidest, pointless, silliest thing I've ever heard. The reason why I'm saying patronizing, because it sounded one of the most sensible things I'd ever heard about the Mesolithic period, right? And I didn't need to apologize, because I said that this was, how have you come up with this idea? It's amazing, because I've never come up with it in any books at all, right? And what we're going to do, we're going to leave that there a minute. We're going to leave tree houses there completely. And hopefully by the end, one of you will remind me about the tree houses again. So there you go. So you have got the book, both of you. I do believe Goff has got a copy as well. You've got the book Ancient Britain. It's pointless showing me on the screen, because I can't see you at this minute, because I just got the whiteboard on the screen. And one of the things that you do see in textbooks is that the Mesolithic period began approximately 12,000 years ago. In Britain, GB, right? Because the Mesolithic period in different parts of the world, in fact, has different dates. But most books will turn around to say that the Mesolithic period ended approximately this one. Hang on a minute. And you come on to the Neolithic period. We'll leave them up on the screen a minute, right? But there's one problem with all that. I've never been able to understand that date 6,250. You read it and you read it and you read it. It never makes any sense. Because why suddenly is there 6,250 years ago? Let's be silly. On the 24th of October at 12:15, right? Because it is silly, right? What I do to make things easier, I change the game. I change this to 8,500 years before present. That's what I do. Because then, for example, what happens then? We've got Doggerland is flooded, right? Doggerland is flooded. And there we go. And this is a thing, you see. We will look at Doggerland quite a lot as well. So there we go. And Doggerland is flooded 8,500 years ago. And to me, that is the end of the Mesolithic period. That makes sense. Nothing more, nothing less. I'm lecturing you now. However, what I would say, bloody hell, the Roman period began in AD 43. So that's nearly 2,000 years ago. Nobody argues about that date, but I'm going to bloody argue about it now. Sorry about my bloodies, but it makes sense. The Roman influence in Britain had already began well before Julius Caesar and in his first abortive invasion in 56 BC. We already started having use of coins in Britain. Lots of things were going on. And between 56 and 43, here we go, 43 AD, there were Roman settlements, Romanized, not Roman. There were Roman traders here as well, and all sorts of different things. Britain had become really Romanized in the south before AD 43, right? But we use the date AD 43 to begin a period, right? So therefore, I'm in my rights to say that this period of the Mesolithic ends 8,500 years ago because Doggerland is lost and our link with Europe is over. That makes sense to me. It makes perfect sense. So what we're going to do now, we're going to go back to school again, right? Here we go. We're going to go back to school and we're going to do this. We're going to say, right, before 12,000 years ago, you've got something known as the Paleo, and then you've got the word lithic, right? So paleo means basically old. It means old. Paleo, old, 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 old. Right. So what we then do, as we've established, paleo means old. Meso means middle, as in Middle America. Meso, meso, middle, meso, middle. And we know when that period ends, 8,500 years ago. But then, after the ending of my Mesolithic period, it's Karl's ending of my Mesolithic period, not James Dyer or anyone else's, not Barry Cunliffe or that raggedy guy who works at Flag Fen. What we've got next is, and that guy with long hair, Neil Oliver, who we shall not mention. What the next period is, I do like Neil Oliver, Neolithic period, which basically means, if you want to shout it out, that means new. So we've now established all of this, right? And just to repeat as well, I know I'm going over old ground, but it's good to get this into our minds. We don't use the word lithic. We don't use the word lithic periods, right, until 1865. And then that brings in Pengelly's work at Ken's Cavern, when we start to use the word lithic, which basically means, and there is one other thing, just to sort of get on with it, right? The Paleolithic period is basically the old Stone Age, right? And there we go. What we then need to do is the Mesolithic period is the middle Stone Age. There we go. And you can quickly work out the rest. The Neolithic period is the new Stone Age, right? So we got rid of all that. So one real great thing about doing the Mesolithic period is it's enlightening. It's the period of enlightenment, but I'm talking out of my hat, because every period in history is enlightened. Do you know what, guys? This word transition, absolute nonsense, because the word transition can be used for any period in history. Now, the Mesolithic period is enlightening, but it wasn't the first period in history where they started using boats. It's not the first period in history in Britain where they started maybe planting crops or cutting down trees. But we've got to start a period 12,000 years ago. And what happens 12,000 years ago? The reason why we start the Mesolithic period 12,000 years ago, even though there are innovations and stuff that we attribute to the Mesolithic period only, but we do have boats and little bits of evidence of settlements and all the rest of it before that. that's the end of the Ice Age. So that's the beginning of a Mesolithic period. That's the only reason. That is the only reason why we start the beginning of the Mesolithic period then, simply because it's the end of the Ice Age. We can sort of date that, obviously not as precisely as we would like to. You can look at books and say, actually, the Ice Age ended 11,900 years ago or 12,100 years ago. We don't really care, right? We need to work out where we are, where we're going, the direction that we're thinking of. Do you know what, guys? We're going to go off on a tangent. What I like to do is challenge some of the narrative, but also put weight on the narrative. What we sometimes use the word transition, right? Can't be bothered to write the rest. Transition. Oh, here we go. Oh, there we go. So transition, the transitional period, trans, right? Transsexual, transition, trans, it's in the middle, right? Some people say that the Mesolithic period, the Mesolithic period, is actually a transitional period between the Paleolithic period and the Neolithic period. Nonsense. And the reason why I say that is that there's so much flowing in the Mesolithic period. We got first settlements. We got early signs of agriculture, animal husbandry, a sense of living, a sense of glad, a sense of space, right? And one of the things that that we sometimes say is that the first, I'm going to say it, not sometimes say, this is my words, right? You know my love of that period just before the First World War. I always say that, you know, we were great, you know, we were civilized, you know. Then somebody jumps in and says, oh, you had slaves. Oh, forget it, right? But what I'm saying, before the First World War, the Great War, you had planes, relative peace in Europe, relative peace across the world. You had cars, you had innovations, you had ships. The Titanic sank, but you had other ships that were out at sea that could take thousands of passengers. You had planes that had all these innovations, and then the First World War comes in and it destroys everything that it destroys the peace. And then from 1914, we've got a continuous world that's at war with each other, right? We've had wars, we've had big wars since 1914, endless wars absolutely everywhere, you know. And you can say, oh no, you're wrong. And I say, no, Korea's been at war. Korea's South and North Korea have been at war since 1951 or whatever it was, you know. China's been at war with Taiwan for a long time, and you've had all the Gulf War, you've had the Falkland War, you've had this little border conflict in Ukraine, and all these other things going on, right? So you've had these wars that are continuous, right? But what I got to get to my point, right? Some people say that the First World War is a transitional period, and then you've got the between the wars, that's the transitional period. Then you've got the war itself, a transitional period. Nonsense, right? There's no such thing as transitional, right? Everything's flowing. And I'm very much a lover of a writer called Tim Ingold. I love this idea of the line. I love his idea of continuance. Within continuance, there's always breaks. But if you look at the wheel and the grids on the wheel, it still goes around, right? Everything goes around. Everything's within a direction, right? Life continues. Life goes on. Everything is movement, right? So no such thing as transitional. And what I'd like to do now is snort a few images in you. Let's have a bit of a snort, right? Let's chuck a couple of images up there, and then what we're going to do, we're going to go, there we go. Oh, there we go. And we're going to go back to that, and we're going to, do you know what, right? I didn't know that I could have my video up on here, but now I do. But we're going to stop that now. And what we're going to do, we're going to go to screen. We're going to do this, and we're going to go to there. And hopefully the dodgy websites that I've been looking at won't come up on the screen. So, right. So, oh, the image that I was wanting to look at is gone. And what we're going to do, we're going to type in just out the Mesolithic period. And there we go. The Mesolithic period. There it is. There we want to show it. There we want to be it. This is a reconstruction of Star Car. A good little backdrop. Well, what we're going to look at now. So I've got to remind myself, and I'm probably speeding through this a lot quicker than I want to, but I'm in a bit of a I'm in a bit of a flow, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to go to the Ashmolean description of what the Mesolithic period is about. But what I would like to do as well, because if I go on here and I make sure that I get this in there, right? And again, it is very much about trying to get a perspective of what the Mesolithic period means. So, Mesolithic, a key thing about this, it's a word used to describe European, Northern African, and the Asian world, right? We don't really have a Mesolithic period or understood to be the same type of Mesolithic period in Australia or maybe South Africa or the Americas, right? But we do have a Mesolithic period. Our dates for the Mesolithic period are different from the dates elsewhere. And you see what I did there? I've ended our Mesolithic 8,500 years ago. So I'm not mucking around with any nonsense that we see with ideas of the Mesolithic period in Europe. We are disconnected from Europe. That's the end of our Mesolithic period. Nicely done. Makes sense. Job done. Right? So, but what we do find is that what does the Mesolithic mean? What is the constituent parts of the Mesolithic period? Trees, and more bloody trees, and warming up the environment, right? That really defines the Mesolithic period in Europe, across most of Asia, and no doubt Great Britain. But what we do find is that we have boundaries to our Mesolithic where they don't really have boundaries in places like the Indus Valley, because there's not bloody ice sheets retreating 12,000 years ago across the Indus Valley in India, right? So our idea of the Mesolithic is a lot easier to understand and to sort of transpire to get to grips with what's going on. So just a little bit of information here, and then it sort of ties in with that narrative of trees and warming up. I've got to take a little bit of a note here. I just got to make sure that I get that in there. Do you know what? I don't, guys. This is a bit of a theological thing, right? You know, when you write things down, you don't forget them. But if you try to remember them, you forget them, right? So because this wasn't recorded on Tuesday, I've got to make sure that I can remember everything I did on Tuesday. It's quite a strange one, man. So if I'd recorded it, I wouldn't have lost it. Life. Anyway, so what we think about the Mesolithic period, stop my nonsense, is the type of culture associated with the Mesolithic varies between areas. But it is associated with a decline in hunter-gatherer groups. Right? And I am going to jump on there like a man on the back of a horse and chuck in animal husbandry. Now, I believe that what is the hallmark of the Mesolithic period is a massive intercourse between animals and human beings. Animals no longer being seen as items of flesh, but being seen as items useful to humans, and animals seeing we're useful as well, scavenging dogs around a human settlement. But am I right about that? Because am I right in thinking that for the first time in history we started keeping animals as pets? No, I'm not. But I'm saying one of the big hallmarks is that there's the evidence to say that we've got lots of animals living with us. That's what I'm saying. There's more evidence than before. Because if you want to go back to Goff's Cave, and we go back to 14,700 years ago, I said about, just remember this, I said about bits of human bone being shaped and worked and an activity associated with the human bone being the same activity associated with animal bones. And I made the point that maybe they revered the animals as much as they revered humans because they were all placed together. So does that indicate that they had pets? Did they indicate that they had love for animals as we have love for animals? Maybe it does. But we definitely see that animal husbandry is a massive part of the Mesolithic period, for more reasons than we've seen before. Now this is the thing. We do have evidence of boats before the Paleolithic period. Start again. We do have evidence of boats before the Mesolithic period in the Paleolithic period. We also have evidence of ladders in the Paleolithic period. But what we do see more evidence of boats and more evidence that ladders and steppy type things were being used in the Mesolithic period than ever before. So this idea about broader hunter-gatherer way of life changing, people becoming more sophisticated, using smaller lithic tools like microliths, instead of using the heavy chipped equivalents of heavy axes before. Depending on the region, some use of pottery and textiles could be seen to be a massive innovation associated with the Mesolithic period. Some say that Mesolithic period isn't complex. I say it is very complex. Just because we don't have all the massive, annoy me off evidence of the Neolithic period, in the sense of big burial chambers and all these other things that go bump in the light. Nevertheless, we mustn't misunderstand or disunderstand the Mesolithic period. We've got to sort of get to grips with it. Can I show you a little bit of a chart? And what I want to do, this little chart is actually taken off Wikipedia, and and it's a nice little chart, and I agree with it. So not always think about using Wikipedia for my classes, but occasionally you do find the odd nice image, and as good as some of the images that Gough took within the likes of Kent's Cavern. So here we go. This is a nice little chart, right? Let's get this right before present, right? So what we're seeing here, we can actually clearly see here 10,000 years ago, 11,000 years ago, and roughly between 12,000 and 11,000 years ago, the Ice Age ends, right? Now, I round it up to 12,000. I'm sorry, but I do round it up to 12,000. And then what you do see is as you go through here, you can see there that the temperature is rising. And if you look at that little nib there where it's got cold event, if you go 9, we're sort of 8.5 here. If you look there nicely, that's just before that, you've got the flooding of Doggerland, right? Some of this doesn't correlate, but if you look there, 8.2 thousand years ago, and you see a massive rise in temperature there again, that huge rise in temperature there again is within this gulf here, is when the Doggerland is flooded. What I am saying is use my dates as a benchmark. Don't use them as the Bible equivalent of getting things smack on. It's not AD 43, but it's close as do is. This period as well, Pleistocene, Hyolocene. The Hyolocene is the period that we live in. This is a geological period, Pleistocene, Heliocene, right? And just a reminder, that's when the last glaciation ends, right? This is now an interglacial, but we are still in an ice age. We're still in an ice age because we've got ice on the ice caps. Sometimes this gets very confusing, but it's not. This chart is a great chart. It's so useful. But I'm really interested with that 8.2 thousand years ago, where it says cold event. That's known as a stadial, right? Within an interglacial, you've got stadials, cold events, and it goes up and down, up and down, up and down. But there we go. We can see the warming of our environment, and it's sort of, this is what this is like, okay. And if you look at something, to be controversial, right, our temperature could be a little bit more warmer than it is today, right, because it's happened in the past. Look at that there. Look at that spike there. So 4, 3. There you go. This here, there. Look at that spike there, where it gets very, very warm. I know by basically a few degrees, but our temperature within our environment hasn't really got there yet. So I'm not one for global warming. I'm actually for global freezing. But I'm a Professor David Bellamyite rather than lots of this modern man-fangled stuff. So what we want to do, we want to go back to the chart. I like to be honest with you guys. And this, not happy with this at all. But I do like to look at images. Sometimes to learn, you've got to criticize. And when you criticize, you get one point of view and another point of view. Whether he's right or wrong, make up your own mind. So, oh yeah, I need a little glass of water a minute because Goff hasn't stopped talking. And what I'm going to do, I'm not going to bring Goff in here in a minute. Henry, anything you'd like to say at this stage while I get my little drink out?
No, I was just having a little drink myself. There's an awful lot to take on board at the moment, so I'm just keeping quiet.
But the thing is, right? There is an awful lot to get on board at this minute, right? But we're not really doing the detail and the nitty-gritty. So this frame that I'm setting out for you today is vital to understand the Mesolithic period. When we did the Paleolithic period, we did the frame throughout the months, right? And that was deliberate. But now we understand the frame, we understand how it works. Good point. There's an awful lot to take in. Now we're gonna put something else in, right? And what I want to do is get a chart. I want to get a map of Europe, right? And I haven't done this before, or I haven't done this for a long time, right? We're going to do trees. And you know I love trees. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to type in a map of Europe. I haven't planned to do this today, but we're going to do it. Right, okay. What I want is a geological map of Europe, right? This would be better because we don't want those... We don't want little countries on here. So, oh, you know what we're going to do? Which one should we go for? I think that one's a nice one, isn't it? It's almost taken us back to school, hasn't it, boys? Right. Have you got a really nice map up on there, yeah?
Yes.
Yep. Yep.
Right.
I can see where I come from.
You can see where you come from, right? Now, I've just suddenly realized that I'm not going to be able to draw on this map. So, you know, I'm still trying to navigate this. I'm still trying to navigate this. So I'm just trying to think of a way I could draw on this. Well, maybe we could just use our eyes. You know, I want to draw on it. I really do. I got to try and think outside the box a minute. I got to let's just sort of, if I download, I'm just trying to work out. It would be really good. Right, okay. If maybe right, okay, or maybe I could just draw on it. I think. Bookmarks, tabs, translate, settings. Nope. Okay, right, here we go. You know, for the sake of argument, guys, just just follow, right? This is how we'll do it. It's a bit disappointing I'm not able to scribble on this, but we're going to do it anyway. So we all know where everything is. We all know where France is. We all know where Great Britain is. We all know where Ireland is, and we all know where Orkney is, right? So this is what we need to do. So guys, think of 12,000 years ago. Get the idea of 12,000 in your head. Think of 11,000 years ago. Between 12 and 11,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, there were no trees in Britain, or very few. 11,000 years ago, Britain was practically covered in trees as far as probably Yorkshire. And then by about 10,000 years ago, Britain was completely covered in trees, including Ireland. We also have to explain something else. I know this is talking to the converted, but that area, all that light blue area, between Great Britain and France was covered in trees. That area between Norway, Denmark was covered in trees. The area between Norway and say Hull, or if you want to go over towards sort of the Firth of Forth, right, that was covered in trees. So all of that is covered in trees by probably around 11,000 years ago. By as I say, 10,000 years ago, this was all trees, right? Now remember, the main thing that we need to really establish is what's going on, right? Now, one thing I would say is this: the tree line is humanity's greatest competitor between 12 and 10,000 years ago. Human beings wish to hunt animals, and with trees growing up everywhere, the tree itself becomes an inhibitor of being able to hunt those animals. It also becomes an inhibitor of the animals themselves. So roughly between 12 and 11,000 years ago, any big fauna like the mammoth, the woolly rhinoceros, becomes extinct. And slowly but surely, the giant Irish elk becomes extinct. And all those mega animals from the Paleolithic period become extinct. And the reason is trees. Trees. They would love to graze on that wonderful, lush tundra, right? But it's trees. The landscape that they were used to, and they're not able to move around. They're not able to mate. They're not able to sort of graze as they used to, because trees are bloody everywhere, right? And another fact that I gleamed into my soul on Tuesday was about sheep and goats, right? And I thought, hang on a minute. I thought, if these mega animals are disappearing because of the trees, why are animals like sheep and goats, the ungulates, grazing upon the trees before they become established? Because they're not there yet. They are not there. And that's a really good thing for me to say. When I went to Shetland, my lecturer turned around and said, well, you can plant as many trees as you want in Shetland, but they're never going to establish because there's sheep everywhere and there's goats everywhere. So these trees must have become established before great ruminants started munching away. And the deer is a ruminant as well, because it's going to munch away. So the smaller deers from the south haven't made it to the north yet. Now, this is a very important point. What we're going to do is go away from this chart, right? We're going to go away from here. We've got an idea. We've established where we are. We know what we're doing. We know where we are. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to go to my little chart, right? And we're going to go with the whiteboard. Okay, we're going to go with whiteboard. We're also going to go with this. And we're going to do a little bit of a list. So if we can gather in, I'm enjoying this. We can gather 12,000 years ago and we could go right. And we've got that there. What we're probably saying between those 2 points is that you get waves of trees. The first waves of trees, you might get your dwarfed birches, right? I'm not going to be able to put all these on you, but you get the dwarfed birches. You get your hollies. You get your likes of your, hang on, I just had it. You hawthorns. There we go. You have your hawthorns. You also have your hazels. You have all these bushes coming through. And for example, and your rowans as well. Chuck your rowans in there as well. Small mountain ashes. Rowans have berries, right? Hawthorns have berries. Hazel has nuts. Okay. Your birches are pollinators, right? So we'll leave that one there for now, right? Hollies have berries. Now, the 3 H's and the R's have something in common. The hazel itself, nuts, they're going to be buried away from the tree line out in the open, right? By squirrels. The other ones are going to be dropped by birds in their droppings away from the tree line, right? So what we're talking about is these in particular, these species here, and the birch as well, which is going to be a pollinator blown in the wind, right? So these themselves are going to be key to moving the tree line, right? So I'm going to ask. I haven't checked this out, but I believe this fact is true. Would you say Paris is approximately 1,000 miles away from the city of York? Would you agree? Come on, folks.
Possibly, yeah, maybe a bit less.
Okay, then a bit less is good as well. So what I'm going to say is this: the tree line, I believe, from Paris, because that's well out of ice, right? And I'm sort of underestimating the power of tree lines moving, right? I believe every year, right, the tree line is moving along, right? So every year is 1 mile forward. Second year, 2 miles forward. And you can probably work out that by the time you get to 11,000 years ago, from 12,000 years ago, 1,000 years, the tree line has moved 1,000 miles, which makes sense, which does make a lot of sense. And within that 1,000 years, the temperature is rising. So the tree line is going to move again. Climate is going to have an effect on the movement of the tree line. And also, a little bit behind the tree line are going to be those animals, right? Or they're going to be in front, one or the other. Actually, you could argue both. You could argue that some of those big herds are going up in the north, right? And they're like summer visitors, because it's still going to be a bit cold 11,900 years ago, right? So they're going to go up north and they're going to be summer visitors. But in the winter months, all that fecal matter, all that manure is on the landscape, and all those nuts have been buried, and all that other stuff that is there is gonna propagate, is gonna sort of grow, right? But and that's what's going to help as well. So, but what I'm talking about is other animals behind the tree line. You've got the likes of humans. You've got the likes of those ungulates, like the sheep and the deer. They are gradually moving up. They're not really taking advantage of minor changes in temperature. But by 11,000 years ago, things are massive. But we've missed out 2 bits of detail, folks. And the 2 bits of detail are the other trees. Now, what do you know about trees? Trees themselves are no good if they're exposed, right? So in amongst, so what we've got here, if we want to draw X and X and X, right? These little trees, all these little tiny little trees growing, right? are moving the tree line forward, right? And behind them are the medium-sized trees, like your ash tree, and maybe like your aspen, and maybe like all those middle rows, maybe like your birch, right? Birch is sort of between medium and large tree, right? But also what you're going to do here is you're also going to have your yews and your Scots pines. Now, this is really, really interesting. Scots pine nuts and yew is nut as well. Now, that's a really good thing. But none of these trees can be established without our little friends here. None of these trees can be established without these. So what's happening is that the berries are being dropped amongst the berries from all these yellow trees here, you know, lots of these, and maybe some of the pollinating ones. All these nuts and all the rest of it, and the pollen and berries are ending up in amongst this tree line here, and that's protecting them. So as these get bigger, these other trees down here are living amongst this line. So in other words, what we're saying is that the trees in this category here are being assisted by these, right? So if you want me to give you dates, let's move that again. Let's move that. If you want me to give you dates, we're talking a rough, around 11,000 years ago, we are now really moving forward. But the big beasts, I've done the date wrong. Sorry, I've got that wrong. Between 11,500 years ago, you've got all this being established. But along the way as well, you've got the beasts. And the beasts, the mega beasts of the woodland, are these trees here. Your oak, your elm trees. These play a massive role into problem A and solution B. It's problem A, solution B. Now, the problem is that with these big trees, as they end up within this line of the medium trees and the small trees, these trees, as they get mature, are starting to dominate the woodland, right? These trees dominate the woodland. They're really starting to dominate it, right? But trees like the Scots pine are able to survive in areas where these trees don't grow. In doing so, keeping alive some of these lesser trees and the medium-sized trees, right? So these are the problems here, the oak and the elm trees by 11,000 years ago. They're also the solution. These big trees are the ones that keep the woodland together. These are the ones that support a great deal of life. And these are the ones that bring us onto the tree house thing towards the end. Now, what we have done, we've got really enthusiastic, and what we've seen is the very nature of the trees and the power of the tree being the direct competition against human beings and these and all the other animals, because these trees here are the ones that protect the forest, because the girths of these trees are absolutely massive, right? Now, can we go into another thing again? Right, we're going to go into something else. And again, sorry for all the data. And again, this is recorded, so you can catch up with most of this anyway. Now, I did something really stupid a few weeks ago, right? Now, basically, we've now got a chainsaw, right? And the law has changed with chainsaws. you're not allowed to use a chainsaw unless the other person owning the land is around, right? So if you go off and use a chainsaw by yourself and you end up, the chainsaw kills you, right? They can be done for manslaughter, right? So I had this chainsaw and I thought, right, I can't legally use this chainsaw by myself without supervision from the other person who owns the land. So if I die whilst they're on site, they can't be done for manslaughter, right? So there is a reason for why I've mentioned that. I decided that I needed to cut down a rotten larch tree, right? When I say it was rotten, it had died last year. It was a rotten larch tree, right? I needed to cut it down, right? So I thought I can't use the chainsaw, so I've got to use the axe, right? So what I did, with never cutting down a tree before, the tree itself was about a foot in girth, right? Very minor tree, right? A foot in girth, right? So the tree itself was about 35 years old, right? So I decided it needed to go, right? So naturally, I learned a lot from that because it nearly killed me. So so the tree itself, really straight tree, I started cutting in here, right? And I thought that if I'm cutting here, the best place to run would be in that direction, right? And I'm glad I didn't run in that direction because I nearly did. So it took me a whole hour with an iron axe to hear the synonymous creak. So as I cut it again, I heard a creak, and just as I was about to run in this direction into the direction of where the tree was falling, I ran in the opposite direction, right? And the tree fell down, right? I learned a lot that day. You're a bloody stupid idiot. But I learned where and how you should cut down a tree. I did learn a lot that. I did learn a lot. Use some C4 works better. Shut up. And then, not that you're talking about gunpowder now, C4, hopefully. So then it got me thinking, folks. It really got me thinking about the topic that we're doing today. And what it did, it got me thinking about these big trees, right? And these big trees themselves, and we will talk about this big tree thing again. These big trees themselves, by the time we get to 11,000 years ago, the big trees. Now, what I know about trees, ash trees grow for about 3,500 years, right? Not 3,500 years, nonsense. Ash trees grow for about 350 years, right? Oak trees can grow for about 2,000 years, 2,500, 3,000 years. So basically, when you get within 1,000 years, some of these early oak trees, some of these oak trees that are following the tree line very early on, right? The ones that managed to get into the mix really early on, because I know I said 11,500 years ago, that there are exceptions. Remember the word transition, non-transition. Some of these trees, by the time you get to 11,000 years, they're 500 years old. Some might be a lot older than that. And the girths are going to be up to 2 meters. The girths are going to be 2 meters, right? Now, I tried, after an hour and a bit, managed to fell this tree that was a foot, right? You try cutting down a tree that's 2 meters girth, right? You try doing that, right? You can't. With the flint axe, it's basically you can't do it in an hour, you can't do it in a day, you can't do it without a copious supply of axes, flint axes. You cannot do it, right? It takes forever. When I say you cannot do it, I can't do it because I haven't got several weeks to do it, right? You mentioned fire, right? The only way to cut down an oak tree that's got that thickness of girth. Imagine cutting down an oak tree that's 3 meters girth, right? There you go. Even more than that, right? You need to use stone axes, right? You've got to use stone axes. Stone axes can be sharpened a lot quicker than, for example, flint axes, right? And the other thing as well is there ain't much flint about at that stage. Most of the flint is underground. most of the flint is basically far out there on the sea margins towards the Irish coastline. Most of the flint is within sort of deep river estuaries, right? There's not much flint around, so you need stone axes, like the stone axes from Penman axe factory in North Wales. But we're not going to start mining axes for quite some time. So, but these trees were felled. These trees were felled. If anyone managed to get hold of flint axes, they must have had hundreds of them to cut down this tree. And it would have needed more than several people to cut down these massive girth trees, these 3 meter girth trees. Now, you could argue this, right? Fire. That's a good one. Thanks for that, Henry. Fire. And I'm thinking, well, if you try and build a fire around one of these oak trees, right, you've still got the problem of the oak tree still being there after you've built a fire around it, right? It might be suggested that you keep setting light to the outside of the tree, cutting into it, setting light to the outside of the tree, cutting into it, and keep going like that. And eventually you'll cut down the tree because it softens the wood for you to actually, when it's carbonized, it softens down the wood. And eventually, but it still takes a bloody long time. And then the other thing as well is what we do think, when they have felled trees, what they would do to make a canoe, they would scoop out a little bit of the middle and they would set a fire into it, scoop out a little bit of the middle, set a fire into it and do it that way, right? Do you know, all of these are good ideas to try and fell trees that are absolutely huge, right? But there is another way you can go around it. Now, the same person on Tuesday, and I'll give Drina credit for this, she basically mentioned, why can't you dig into the root system? And I thought, well, yeah, because if you're felling a tree, you've got to get rid of the stump eventually anyway, because stumps can last 100 years. You're going to be dead by then, right? Rotten stumps can last 100 years. So particularly really oldie worldy trees, because they're really condensed, a bit like bog oak. And actually, there was an article that Andy, I phoned Andy earlier on, and he said, "Oh, look, bog oak. There's in Ely Cathedral to celebrate the Queen's 1,000 years on the throne. Basically, they got this bog oak there, a 5,000-year-old timber from somewhere like Flag Fen, and they actually made it into a table at Ely Cathedral. Isn't that great? Right, but the wood back then is really hard. We're not talking about bog oak. No, we're talking about the really old trees. They're really going to be hardy. They've been there for a long time, really hardy. Why didn't you cut into the root system? So if you cut into the root system on one side, right, you're going to have to be very careful. You cut into the root system on the other side, and you're going to have to keep sort of gently doing it, because otherwise the tree will collapse on you, right, which isn't going to be good for anyone. So maybe if you cut into the root system, and that might be quicker than actually felling the tree in the conventional way. I remember reading something, to cut a tree that's got a 2 meter girth, you would take 2 weeks. 2 people, 2 weeks to cut down that tree, using a considerable amount of resources to cut down that one tree. And what you're going to do with the tree when you cut it down, right? You've got to cut into it to make pieces. So, that's all really good, interesting stuff. And you know what? I've done an hour now, so we're going to take a break, and we've done a big chunk of what I wanted to do, but then again we haven't. So if we go over today, it's fine, and then the following week we'll be joined by the Bridgen class, and Anne can ask as many questions as she's like, can't she, Henry?
We might all be leaving.
Well, just think, Jane comes back and you leave. That's good, isn't it? Right. So what I'm going to do now, after the break, I want to talk about zones. I haven't done the Ashmolean thing yet, so I want to do the Ashmolean reference. I also want to do the reference out of this book behind me as well. It's called The People of the Forest, and then we've got the images. So we've got 5 things I want to do still. I'm not going to tell you what we're going to do next week, because I need to get my mind into the Mesolithic period. I'm getting there. I'm getting into it. But I need to really, there's so much I want to do with the Mesolithic period. It's such an exciting period. And then we get to the Neolithic period. We're spoilt for choice. So let's enjoy the Mesolithic period and see how it goes. So here we go. If we do that there. And if I do that there, stop the screen share, job done. Right. Henri, anything you'd like to say?
No, I think I dropped you a few questions, but I think you answered most of those actually running through your piece. So thank you very much.
Right. So was there a main type of tree? So what I'm going to, that's a good question. You think I've answered it, but I haven't. So the main type of tree, I would say, from what I can understand from the island of Hoy and the primeval ancient woodland that is there, we've only got one or two primeval woodlands in the whole of Britain. One is on the island of Hoy, called Briardale. If I look at that, and I think the trees that seem to be there are birches, and I think we've got maybe. I think we got a berry tree, so I think we might actually have something like a hawthorn there. I would say that the hawthorn is probably the most important tree from the bush type trees, the small trees. Media. I'll answer the question about the sheep in a minute. Medium tree. If I want to do a medium tree, I'm not going to go with a rowan because that's going to be very similar to a lower tree. I might actually go with something like an ash. Ash. You could say is a big tree, but I would. One thing with ash is it gives a lot. It's like I always refer to the ash tree as the prostitute of the woodland, right? So if you've got an ash tree, not only does ash leave a lot of leaves on the ground, right? It leaves a bloody great deal of timber. Wood, timber for building, wood that's collected. Ash is good if you want bits of wood because ash sheds a lot of wood over the course of the year. And the reason why that's good is it's going to go onto the ground, it's going to break up, and it's going to assist. So ash tree, and the big tree. You want me to say oak, and I'm going to say oak, but there's two main types of oak: pedunculate and sessile oak. Now pedunculate, English oak, which is really fat and squat, and that's the one I go with. I wouldn't go with Welsh oak, which is sessile. I wouldn't go with that, and that's what I'd go with. And where did sheep come from? The Middle East. Goats are already with us, so the sheep are going to slowly come along later on, right? They're going to slowly come along later on, precisely when we don't know. And wabbits, don't go there. We're not doing rabbits. That's too controversial for even me. Blowing up trees and using fire. We've done all that. Goff, anything you'd like to say, lovely?
No, I think you're setting the future lectures very well. Yeah, setting the cement, Yeah, no questions.
Setting the stall, setting the cement. We're doing the groundwork. We're doing the ground. We are.
But something I wanted to tell you, nothing to do with what we do just now. But when I went to down to Devon on the weekend, we went to sprinkle my uncle's ashes, and
right, okay.
Yeah, and by coincidence, some of my uncle's wife's family were there, and one of the sons, so like I don't know what he's related is to me, but he actually is a marine archaeologist and works for York University, and he's doing Doggerland at the moment. That's one of his projects, and sunken forests. Yeah, and also he was.
You can't make it up, can you?
You can't. He did the first excavation of the Newport boat.
You can't make any of this up, can you?
I couldn't believe it.
No, you can't. Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Isn't that strange?
No, it's amazing. You talk. He's doing the subject that we're going to be doing, and I have done a bit of. So You know, you could have said, "Oh, I know this and that about Doggerland," because we've already. But obviously, yeah, that's great. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So,
It's all good stuff, isn't it? It's all good stuff.
it's all good stuff. And do you know what? Can I think this is a question I got for both of you, and it's quite a deep question. It's actually nothing to do with the subject, but it's to do with the classes, right? You know, I'm not going to go into detail, but I've still got hair braids in for this pirate thing that I'm doing, which I'll be doing for quite some time. I would say this, that before the pandemic, I was going to be doing my live stuff, and I was going to be retiring from doing the lectures, right? But because the pandemic came, 2001, we're into 2002. I'm still lecturing, but I was going to keep my Tuesday evening class anyway. The way things are going, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it's likely that the only stuff that we will be doing will be online, right? And I would like to ask this: Did you guys have you guys got any preconception still that I might be coming to do live classes at any time in the distant future? Or are both of you just enjoying what we're doing online? There's two questions there. Are you quite happy just this is what we do, right? And you're not expecting anything else? That's what I'm asking.
Personally, I'm quite happy with what we're doing.
Okay. And Henry, yeah, go on.
It suits me, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with Goff, actually. This format works very well. Quite happy and content with it. Obviously, as long as the Wi-Fi battery works, fair enough.
Yeah.
I had no expectation of going back to the class, because I think the Bridge End group kind of went off in a different direction to where I was. So this works much better for me.
Yeah, because what might be happening, and I can't say too much more because it's not
Neil
fair on
Oliver's going to be doing it.
What's that?
Neil Oliver's going to be doing it.
Well, actually, me and Neil might be. Did I tell you a few weeks ago? Neil signed into one of the bloody things. It was so pathetic. It was like, "Hiya, Neil." It was so embarrassing. It was just like I had to apologize to the poor bugger. It was just like, this is just why.
Karl, I think as long as you continue doing your trips with groups, whatever, to Hadrian's Wall, and I think you'd have to keep that going. If you stop that as well, I don't know whether you'd be denying some people some pleasure.
Well, the pleasure of his company.
Yeah.
Help you. Actually, that is a good point. The new format, because I don't think we ever recovered from the pandemic, and obviously Jessica come on board. That's been a godsend, but it's been I remember sitting back, and I was seeing the Bridge End class get less and less throughout the pandemic, and we managed to keep hold of most people in Lantuit, and then what I did see when we came back after the pandemic, we had a nice group of 12 people sit in a room in Lantuit, and I just thought, oh, that's really good. But in Bridge End, we just never got it back, and it was just like, I thought, well, how can I stand in a room knowing that we had all these people at one stage, and now I can't get half of them back, and that's what the killer was. No. So anyway, we've done really, we've gone deep there now, right? So We've been on for an hour and 23 minutes now, so I'm gonna take a break. I need something to eat, so I'm gonna be. We'll come back at 12:03.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
12:03 and 43 seconds. Some say 44. You know what? I would love to have a poster.
Your call cannot be taken at the moment. Very vicious. If you'd like to change your message.
What's it? Even door. Jan. Check components. Right. 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 Are we ready? Where's that French bloke? I wish he'd hurry up. Do you know what do you know the problem with French people, Goff?
Yeah.
They're always late. Late to realise that they ran away in France in the Second World War. Late to realise that they should have engaged their reserve armies at the Battle of Waterloo. Late to realise that the only good thing that Frenchman is good for is garlic. No, actually, I got to be honest with you. Napoleon was an extremely talented individual. And the other thing as well is, in history, people miss out the war between France and Britain in before 1750, where there was a very talented general called Desargues, who had actually defeated the Duke of Marlborough, and the French were quite good in battle against the British until the Napoleonic War. But they weren't. I've tried to look into this. The French didn't have much success at sea, and it's always been one of those problems with the French that naval wise, they've always been let down by their navy. Except that's not true either, because when you look at the American War of Independence, if it wasn't for the French Navy, the Americans would have lost.
That's right. But even their merchant fleet is not. They're not renowned for their seafaring skills.
No.
I mean, one of the best are the Russians and the Italians. Their maritime history of training and efficiency in the maritime world is in the marine world. Trade, Dutch, British.
I'm glad you mentioned the Italians, because you've got the Genoese and the Venetians, and you think, yeah, and you will know that the biggest failures of Mussolini was to actually enter the Second World War in the first place. The Italians were doing pretty good naval wise. They were building new aircraft carriers. They were building a new fleet. And it was just the futility of Mussolini entering the Second World War.
Yeah.
And
go on about the Italians being terrible soldiers and giving up. And
that's absolute nonsense. That's an absolute wipeout. No, sorry. Do you know what? It was the Italian army holding the British back in North Africa that it allowed the Germans to escape on many times. And who would be captured on the battlefield because they run out of ammunition and all the rest of it would be the Italians who would be surrendering because they couldn't fight with anything. But those were the ones who were holding back the British. If you look at the Italian involvement in Alamein, it's quite considerable, but you don't hear about that, do you?
Of course not.
You hear about Rommel managing to run away with his Panzer Corps and all the rest of it, but it was the Italians who were holding the line.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Much maligned.
What's that?
Much maligned.
Yes, much maligned. And it's absolute nonsense. It was, in fact, their automotive industry was pretty sound before and it's pretty sound today, isn't it? So.
You're right.
It's just. I think the biggest problems with the Italians is just that they've had absolute crap leadership, and maybe the problem with the Italians is that the fact that it's too big a country, because the people in the south can't stand the people in the north. You can't change that. That's right. The question, and then the middle part of the country would be best to stay with the north, but the people in the south got different ambitions, different ideas. I know we could talk about the mafia and all the rest of it, but that's a bit of malignment as well, and we could just think that the Italians are very, very interesting, powerful people, and can I share you a little story? There was as part of my job up here on a Friday, Saturday, and a Sunday, I get to talk to lots of really interesting people, and I came across this couple, and where they're having a bit of a jar with me and whatever, and the woman started to come out very seriously, and she started to say, "Well, I want to tell you a little story before you go." So she did, and she said that my dad was an Italian. And I said, "Oh, an Italian prisoner of war?" He said, "Oh, definitely not. He definitely was an Italian prisoner of war. He actually lived over here before the First World War. He was a combat soldier for the British Army in the First World War, and just before Mussolini declared war on Great Britain, which was his biggest mistake, he actually ran an ice cream shop, right? And down near Aberystwyth, he ran an ice cream shop. But because he was Italian, because he was basically interred for most of the war, and the local MP and everyone was saying, you know, this guy fought for us in the First World War. Why is he a prisoner? Anyway, he came back. He didn't have any remorse. He didn't have any. And he came back early. Actually, he was out. He was out of the POW camp and whatever. And he became a very successful businessman down here. And this is the thing with the Italians. They is it me or the Italians can forgive where the French don't? Am I right in that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from.
Yeah, the Italians have less resentment than the French, and I think that's what makes the Italian character. And yeah. Anyway, let's carry on. There's 5 points that I wanted to make in this last session. And if none of this in the last session feeds, it doesn't matter at all, because we've got so much to go through over the next few months. I want to do a bit of a screen share, and we're going to see how this one works as well. So we've got that. Basically, this is more important when we look at the Neolithic period from 8,500 years on. When I talk about the landscape being divided into zones, I talk about the zone of the living, the zone of the dead, the zone of the ancestors, the zone of no man's land, and the zone of the area you keep out, and a zone of this and the zone of that, right? I'm not going to say any more about that. But one thing I would say is that when we think about woodland, two humans in the northern hemisphere, particularly with Great Britain, the woodland from about 11,000 years ago is an inhospitable place, an inhospitable landscape. You've got those really hoary old oaks, as Tennyson would refer to them as, the hoary oak. And what I usually say about this is where people are usually living along the river margins, where the trees are less inhibitive of their lifestyle. You can move along rivers and the boat. There ain't roads, there ain't motorways, boats, so they can move along riverways and all the rest of it along the coast. Fish, for example, become a massive part of their diet. Fish had been a massive part of our Paleolithic diet, but now fish were a massive part of the diet. Where they were unable to come across woolly mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses and aurochs and Irish elk and all the rest of it, the fish itself and maybe a seal diet and so on was very much where we're coming at. But we cannot forget what I said earlier on. Animals are becoming friends as well, or had already become friends, but this is a period of when animals are really up in the stakes, and we've got to do a lot more about these animals as well, a lot more in our study. So what we've got margins. We've got we've got this zone itself, the zone of the wood, and we've got the zone of the river margin. And for most of us folks, for a long period between 11,000 and maybe 10,000 years ago, this is what our ancestors were very much looking towards, these two zones. But slowly but surely, there's zone 3. And zone 3 are the openings that our ancestors and the grazing animals have given us. So zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. And also there's one other thing that would be like a Bronze Age type thing. When we come into the Bronze Age sees that the upland areas have been completely abandoned, and they remain completely abandoned to this day after 3,500 years. Because what we do find is trees themselves become established in upland areas, but with the lack of soil cover, which had been offered to them by soil left behind glaciation and all the rest of it, animals, their dung. But in upland areas, trees don't come back when they've been felled, right? And that's basically a fact. And this is one thing I made a big point about in my Barry class on yesterday. I am, which will be probably my only live class that I'll be doing, but I do actually teach a live class down here. But we do actually go over some of the issues that we talk about now as well. So the other thing I would say, talking about the zones. So we've done the zones. Now I would like to talk about what we've got as information on the Ashmolean website, and then we've got to look at people of the pot forest. But before we do people of the forest, we'll look at this thing that I mentioned earlier on. I muted around the tree house. So there we go. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to go back to the normal screen, and okay. You know what, guys? I'm thinking of dating Amber Heard, because at least I know my life will be completely destroyed. Other than thinking that a woman will destroy your life, so at least it's all laid out in front of us. Anyway, I can't stand a woman. Right. Anyway, so all right. So here we go. I would like to start with this Mesolithic. Now, we're going to read what it says about the Mesolithic period. It says that the Mesolithic period began 11,600 years ago. So I told you my date's around there, 12,000, so we'll go with that. But it also says their Mesolithic ends 6,000 years ago, right? Which doesn't tie in with what I'm saying. So just go with what we've got. So it says, recap, the Mesolithic period, Middle Stone Age in Britain, dates from just after the end of the Pleistocene, the Paleolithic period, approximately 11,600 years ago. Approximately, there you go. And it talks about to the beginning of the Neolithic period, 6,000 years ago. Okay, we've debated that. And it basically says that the reason why they argue for their Mesolithic period ending 6,000 years ago is to do with artifacts. But me, I go with an event to decide the end of a period. That makes more sense. And that's why. Back to the Mesolithic from the Ashmolean. People at this time were hunter-gatherers who practiced high logistical mobility within what was an increasingly wooded environment. Well, we'll agree with the wooded environment bit, right? But I'm also going to say that the wooded environment is more or less already there, right? I'm also going to disagree with this mobility of hunter-gatherers. And the reason why I'm going to go there is that we do actually have sites that are permanent, like the site at Hoyk, which is now on the Northumberland coastline, which wouldn't have been back then. There's a big argument about Star Car, which we'll be doing in the future. Some people were mobile, others weren't. But certainly, if you've got access to good fishing all year round, why would you move from that spot? Think about it. I know there is seasonal fishing, but there's always fish in the sea. Mesolithic human activity in inland areas, such as Oxfordshire, seems to have been focused along river valleys, especially during the later phase. I've got to take another note of something a minute. Barry Mesolithic. Right, okay, we won't do that today. So here we go. Seems to have focused along river valleys, especially during the later phase. So we'll sort of agree with that. I've been mentioning that. Britain was joined to Europe, as we know, at the start of the period, as it had been for much of the preceding period, the Paleolithic period. The English Channel and North Sea were originally low-lying plains, but were gradually submerged as the climate warmed and the ice from the last glaciation period had been taken into account in the sea. Britain became an island by about 8,000 years ago. So, yeah, I agree. The massive inundation, 8,500, definitely an island by 8,000 years ago. As the climate warmed, as we've seen with that graph earlier on, the land also became densely forested with hazel, birch, lime, elm, and oak. and the large fauna became dominated by red, roe, deer, elk, and pig instead of those other beasts that has existed before, like the mammoth and the huge Irish elk type thingamajig. Most of the evidence for Mesolithic activity in England consists of stone artifacts, the lithics, the microliths, which I do think we show you at the end of the images, which we will look at soon. Although there is a potential for preservation of organic remains from sites associated with peats, the population is saying we're mobile. Some occupation evidence has been recovered from excavations, which I'm saying, including the identification of hearths and activity areas, which I've also mentioned. There are also possible rare examples of structures and storage pits from some sites, which I'm saying that there is. Right. So what I'd like to do now, we've done that bit. Next, the images. I'm finally organized. So there you go. So if we could do with this now, and we go with this screen, and we go with that. And as Ralph Harris would say, have you guessed what it is yet? There we go. Oh, is it there? Oh, yeah, it is. It's there. Good. Now, there's a few things in this image. Can I be critical? Yeah. The buildings behind. We do actually have evidence that they were also building rectangular and square buildings at this time. They're not all round. So that's one thing, right? Hollowing that boat. Oh my, have you seen the proportions of that boat? Nobody's going to be able to sit in there, are they? Well, we'll move on from that when that's nonsense. The idea that they've got, you're not going to get anything in there, are you? You're not even going to be able to sit in there. Oh, God. Anyway, there is one thing, this bow and arrow technology. Obviously, it may have existed before, but the bow and arrow becomes very, very important as a tool, as evidenced from these microliths. And this sort of idea, obviously, the Mesolithic period occurs in different forms and names in different parts of the world, i.e. from North America as well. But obviously, that's something that we mentioned earlier on. This is a very interesting image. I prefer this one over some of the latter ones. So what we've got here, we've got a coracle, we have a skin boat, which makes sense. And you've got these things, limpet mounds. We will be examining limpet mounds, which become a fascinating piece of evidence. Why have you got limpet mounds? Did they live amongst them? What they do with the limpets? Are they eat in them? And so on and so on. It takes 100,000 limpets to equate to the same protein value as one single auroch, right? So what are they doing with these limpets? That's another thing altogether. But again, different illustrations weighing the different perspectives of this lifestyle, right? Look at that there. Oh, we prefer that boat. You can actually sit in it. So obviously, moving around this landscape, we are actually getting lots more evidence of boats from the Mesolithic period. There is evidence of fishing and maybe tantalizing clues to boats from the Paleolithic period. Because last week, when we looked at a cave in Flintshire, there was harpoons found inside the cave. What are they doing inside the cave anyway? They're not fishing inside the cave, but obviously what we're saying is that they had they were doing fishing in the Paleolithic period, but probably not on a grand scale as they're doing in the Mesolithic period. Okay, all buildings, types and sizes, right? An authentic photograph taken from 10,000 years ago of a loving couple alongside each other, and you could just see the mobile phone there. And these are what I was mentioning earlier on, microliths, right? These are microliths. Microliths are the size of your little piggy finger, okay? And microliths themselves could be used for bows and arrows, the arrows, and you could actually use them for using the sharp points as awls to make holes into leather or make holes into bone or something, little miniature drill type thingamajigs. You could actually use them in agriculture as well. You could put them into a board, and you could you could use it. Oh God, I've forgotten the word. I'm going to use it to scour the soil. There's a certain word where after you've ploughed it to level it with I can't remember. But anyway, you could mount these into a board and drag this across a field to sort of make it flat for planting, for example. So, you know, this is typical Mesolithic technology. This is what we do see in the Mesolithic period, these microliths. These bigger tools would have been used, but because flint itself would have been very, very hard to come by in the Mesolithic period until water level rises, until there's sort of loads of erosion and changes and removal of bits of the landscape, revealing the underbody of the landscape, revealing flint nodules. The flint itself and these lithics were a massive piece of the toolkit for our Mesolithic ancestors. And this is the primary evidence that we do associated with the Mesolithic period across our beautiful land. And you know, there's a lot of it, and we know that they're living out there because we're finding the evidence. So that's a really good point. If we just sort of again, what's going on here? Well, everyone's wearing bear skins. There's my missus there, sat on the log with the white scraggly hair. And here we go. They're all doing different things here. Is this an accurate representation of the past? Well, probably not really, because living in these round sort of buildings, they're a bit cramped and they're a bit vulnerable. So, you know, and then we go on to the last thing. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to find an image, which I haven't done on this one. So I'm going to find an image, and it's going to go old oak. And this was mentioned by Drina on Tuesday, and I slapped her down straight away because what she said was I needed to keep it. Right. So which oak tree are we going to go? We're going to go with that one. Okay. So I'm going to guesstimate that is, I think that's one of the old royal oaks. Yeah, I think so. And that's approximately from the girth there, about 900, something like that. So if you can imagine, in these woodlands, there would have been lots of trees like this. This is a peduncle oak. This is the English oak. So looking at this, and you're thinking, well, sometimes when you have questions, you get great things thrown at you. And she said, you know that image that you've just seen where they're all on the ground and they look really vulnerable? And I'm thinking, well, if a pack of wolves goes through there, most of your children and your elderly people are dead, right? You're not going to be able to bury anyone. Most of you are going to be dead, right? What about living up a tree? And I thought about it. I thought, this is mad. But then I thought, well, let's go with this, right? So unknown to Drina, on Wednesday morning, I discussed this with somebody. You remember Mike, don't you, Goff?
Yeah.
He still does my little class with him, right? So anyway, my best mate, Mike. Anyway, I remembered that Mike used to live up when he was a child, right? He became a nautical guy and he made a lot of money out of the sea. But when he was a child, in the summer months, he used to live up a tree, right? And I thought, right, Mike, I mentioned what Drina said, and he said, yeah, that's possible. And I said, how is it possible, right? And he said, well, if you go up into an oak tree like this, if you take a load of clay, right, you can make yourself a fire in the oak tree. And then I realized the oak tree is not going to set alight. It's really not. A small fire, you're gonna be able to you're gonna be able to put a little fish on a stick or whatever. You're gonna be able to cook. And then he said, oh well. He said, well, what happens when it rains? The water comes down the branches and gathers in the hole in the middle, right? And I said, well, that's not good to live. And he said, hang on a minute. If you put skins up and so on, right, it can be quite watertight, right? You know, it's going to be quite good. But we didn't live up there in the winter months because obviously, you know, all the leaves have gone. And I said, well, that makes sense, right? And then you think about all these different things. You start to think, well, why couldn't the people lived at times up in trees? And you know, when we mentioned earlier on, this is a really key point, a very important point. Let's go with what this said now. Let's go. Hang on. It goes here. I said at the beginning, some people lived in little miniature settlements, Hoyk and Starcar and so on. But this little thing from the Ashmolean basically says more or less no. But then it goes to the end. It says, oh, rare examples of structures and storage pits, including the identification of hearths and activity. But usually none of this evidence is available, right? Well, the thing is, you think about it, well, if most of this evidence isn't available and they were hunter-gatherers, where did they have their fires? The hearths are still going to remain somewhere, or possibly, right? And you start to realize that maybe the absence of some archaeology of where people lived in the Mesolithic period was because they lived up trees. That might sound absolute nonsense. That sounds as nonsense as me saying that they had timbers that were tens of meters in length, that you could actually roof Stonehenge. And everyone that we spoke to we really went into it basically said, yeah, that's possible, because there would have been trees of that length back then to roof Stonehenge, right? And and most people would say that was nonsense, but I really stuck my mask to that one. And do you know what I'm going to do, Gina? She's obviously not watching this, but I'm going to say that I'm going to use that one about a tree house, and I'm going to try and explore it in the future. So if we ever come across any examples and possibilities that we got people maybe living in tree houses in the past, remind me on that. So what I'm going to do now is that we are coming close to the end today. And I would like to mention just a little bit of an extract from this book. It's the one that I actually used for the Paleolithic period. And it does paint a nice little picture. What I'm going to try and do is edit some of it along, but keep some of the bias in as well, because it's good to have another point of view. So the Metholithic period, again, I will just try and get to the point. It says began about 10,000 years ago, but since this book was published in 1984, dating evidence has changed that date. It also says this and that, and this is something that I've gone through the whole discussion today. The Mesolithic may have begun a lot earlier, which by that date it did. The dates are controversial for the Mesolithic period. Thumbs up, we agree. In comparison to the distant and dimly glimpsed eras of human life in the Paleolithic, the Mesolithic in many ways belongs to a relatively recent past, and it does, because the Paleolithic went on for hundreds of thousands of years, back to the origins of humanity. In other ways, it is far removed, not only from the period before, but from the historical periods. These people didn't have metalworking. It does say they didn't have settled cultivation. But personally, as we will see over the next few months, there is evidence to say that in part that they did. Instead of regarding them as primitive, we should admire their resilience and inventiveness. Thumbs up. Their success story is adjusting to changing conditions. Thumbs up. Underlines the remarkable adaptivity of the human species. And you know what? If I just stop there, which I'm not going to, we'll do a little bit more. That's about Doggerland. They survived Doggerland. And if they can survive Doggerland, we as humans can survive anything. You know, I'll say it on another front, right? Not a transitional period, the Second World War. Humanity survived the Second World War with all the atrocities, right? Humans can survive almost everything. Given that most people of this period remained dependent on natural resources, why should we differentiate between the Paleolithic and Mesolithic eras? In many ways, the answer lies with the environment and the sweeping changes which transformed the natural setting of life in Britain in the millennia following the demise of the last great ice age. So that 1,000 years is key. The trees is key. Massive, they're key. As we have seen, the Paleolithic hunting groups who roamed in southern and Midland England towards the end of the glacial era inhabited a tundra landscape, which was seasonally snowbound or locked in ice, and at other times an open expanse of mossy swamps with alpines blooming on the bare rock slopes and pockets of dwarfed birch coming furtively into leaf when the thin sunlight warmed the sheltered southern vales, but that's all they had. This was an open landscape with sweeping vistas and little cover for the great herds of reindeer, bison, horses, and even the mammoth. But we are still talking about pre-12,000 years ago. Striking contrast, and this is where we will end. The Mesolithic peoples perfected a lifestyle which was finely tuned to post-glacial changes that had swept tides of woodland northwards and upwards across the face of Britain. And at that moment, I couldn't have ended any better than that. People of the forest. And today, that's my doing and that's my bidding. Are there any questions? And we will stop this screen sharing and we will stop. And bingo. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch an Irishman by its toe. That's you, Henry. Any questions?
Actually, surprisingly, no.
I'm okay with that. I'm okay. Yeah, that was, can I just say this? That wasn't a lot for me to do today because it's already in my head. I could have done, well, when I did that on Tuesday, I didn't have much to go from. And I thought, this ain't going to go well. And it went very well. So by the time you've got it, it's perfected. So, it's sometimes good to have inhibitors when we look at a site, because it slows me down and it makes me more focused on the issues. But obviously we've done a wide range. So anyway, Henry, thank you very much for that. Goff, anything you'd like to say, darling?
No, you set the scene well. I look forward to the next couple of lectures.
You look forward to the set being filled with all the actors of the past. And we are those very actors that are acting in amongst the full cast that is on the stage, because it's our interpretation gives the story of the past.
Very profound.
Thank you. So on that note, you won't have the gang with us next week, but you will have them the following week. And maybe Jane might be back next week, so that'd be good.
Okay.
So
I'll have to leave the country.
Yeah, I'm going to leave the country with you. We're going to go back to Ukraine. I got to get some of Vlad's billions. So I got to bring some back. I got to swap them into rubles, or is it the other way around? I can't remember.
The other way.
Is it? Right. Okay. I've been the other way most of my life, but I'm not talking about that. So on that note, Goff, it's been an absolute gem. Henry, it's been an absolute gem. And I look forward to seeing you. I look forward to seeing you both next week.
Okay, thank you.
And the anaesthetic is now worn off.
What's that?
The anaesthetic is now worn off.
Yeah, exactly. All right then. Have some good old Captain Morgans.
Right. Have a good week.
And you take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, mate. Cheers, Henry. Bye. Bye-bye. 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 Take care.
I won't leave work. Oh.
Right, folks. So we've done pretty well there today. I'm going to I don't know where I am. That was live, wasn't it? So anyway, I'm just going to do this now. I'm just going to mention that we've got I'm struggling. Oh, chat. Okay. So anyway, was there a main type of tree? We answered it. That for the period. We mentioned, for example, was there a main type of tree? We mentioned about the hawthorn. We mentioned the ash, and we mentioned the oak. Sheep coming from the Middle East, blowing up trees. Shut up. And you use fire. Where did the sheep come from? Middle East. Use some C4, works better. And use fire. Actually, I don't think C4 would work better. You'd probably blow up the side of the tree. You'd have to use loads of it. Anyway, take care, guys. Take care. Bye. Look after yourselves. Don't forget to like, subscribe, Patreon, and join my channel. Thank you. Live end.